Hi everyone, I'm Helen from Susan's family. Today, I'll show you a pet angel bag in the kitty style. It's divided into the main part and the decorations. Let's start with the main part. After it's completed, we'll make and attach the decorations. Now, let's begin making the main part. It consists of 3 areas: the bottom, the body, and the bag opening. Both the bottom and the top opening have 2 separate sections each. Let's start by making the bag bottom. Then, we'll move upwards to make the bag body and the bag opening. First, let's begin with the bag bottom. It includes bottom section 1 and bottom section 2. You need to make 2 pieces of bottom section 1. After completing it, continue crocheting section 2 along the edge of section 1. Keep going with section 2 from there. During this process, you'll need to sew them together and insert a grid board. Start crocheting section 1 of the bag bottom first. Use a foundation chain to start. Then, crochet in rounds back and forth along the foundation chain. Let's take a look at the chart. In the chart, our plus number represents the round number. The stitch instructions column describes the stitches and increases or decreases. When working the current round, the total stitches column shows the total number of stitches. After completing that round, the stitches used include X stitch single crochet, VSC 2-in-1, WSC 3-in-1, chains, and slip stitches. Below, please watch as I demonstrate. For convenience in watching, I will use other colors for the demonstration. For specific yarn, color schemes, and hook sizes, you can refer to the detail page of our product and the charts. First, work the foundation chain. Here, the foundation chain is 39 ch. This indicates that the method for starting is to chain 39. Hang the yarn with your left hand. Hold the hook with your right hand. Make a knot. Slightly tighten it. The knot from the foundation chain does not count as one stitch. Start crocheting chains. Finish crocheting the required number of stitches. Here, there are a lot of stitches. Everyone can check it. 1 braid represents 1 stitch. The final loop does not count towards the stitch count. The explanation for foundation chain is now complete. Next, crochet the first round. R1 is DOW2, V36X, W37X. DOW2 means starting from the second chain from the hook. Count backwards from the side with the hook. 1, 2. This is the second to last stitch. Pick up the braid of the chain. 1 thread on top. Insert the hook and crochet at SC 2-in-1. That is, work 2 single crochets in one position. Note that the main part is all crocheted using X stitch single crochets. From now on, I'll simply call it a single crochet. Insert the hook. Place the hook above the yarn. Yarn over and draw through. Yarn over again, and pull through the loops on the hook. This completes the single crochet. The braid on the upper right is its stitch. Continue by working 1 more single crochet in the same stitch. When you yarn over and draw through, always keep the yarn above the hook. At this point, the SC 2-in-1 is completed. Next is 36X. The number before the X indicates the number of single crochets to work. Here it means to work 36 single crochets. Continue by picking up 1 strand of the chain. Work into each stitch. After completing, the chart below shows SC3 in 1. That means working 3 single crochets into the remaining chain from the foundation chain. 1, 2, 3. After completing the SC3 in 1, then rotate the piece clockwise by half a turn. Let's take a look. Here, there are 2 strands like this on the other side of the chain. All the following work will be crocheted into these kinds of strands. This is also the insertion point for the stitches on this side. Start from the second chain on the left side. And work 1 single crochet into each stitch. Place the yarn tail above the hook. Weave it while crocheting. The single crochets on this side are symmetrical with the other side. Work them in pairs into the same hole. The last stitch is worked into the same hole as the first stitch. At this point, the corresponding stitches for this round are completed. Finish with a slip stitch on the first stitch. Note that the slip stitch is not indicated in the chart here. When crocheting in rounds, you need to finish each round with a slip stitch. Here, the adjacent vertical position on the left side is the beginning chain. The horizontal braid on the left is the stitch of the first single crochet. If you're really unsure, you can also count the stitches from back to front. Insert the hook and work the corresponding slip stitch. Here, the braid at the top right is the slip stitch. Remember, the slip stitch doesn't count as one stitch and needs to be tightened. This prevents having too many stitches later on. At this point, the first round is complete. We now have the neatly textured side of the first round. Consider this as the right side of the entire piece. The texture on the wrong side is relatively blurry. Move on to crochet the second round. Start with CH. Correspondingly make 1 chain. This is the beginning chain for single crochet. It doesn't count as 1 stitch. The total stitches do not include this. Then, the chart shows a turn. This indicates that you need to turn your work. Turn the piece over. Pick up the adjacent stitch on the left. Crochet at SC2 in 1. This round is crocheted on the wrong side of the previous round. The stitch is located at the top left. Then work 36 single crochets evenly. After completing, crochet 3 SC2 in 1. Next, crochet 36 single crochets. Finally, finish with 2 SC2 in 1. At this point, the stitches in the chart are completed. Find the first stitch below. Join with a slip stitch. Tighten it as well. This completes the second round. Next, work on the third round. Start with 1 chain. Then turn your work. This round is crocheted on the right side. The chart below shows X, V, times 2. The parentheses indicate a group. The times symbol indicates the number of times to repeat the group. Start by making 1 single crochet. Then, make 1 SC2 in 1. That completes the X, V. Let me demonstrate it again. First, crochet 1 single crochet. Next, make 1 SC2 in 1. This is the second time. After that, work 36 single crochets correspondingly. Once completed, another set of parentheses appears. It means the same as before. Repeat the stitches inside the parentheses 3 times. First time. Second time. Third time. Then, continue to work 37 single crochets correspondingly. Finally, make 1 SC2 in 1. Next, pick up the first single crochet. Crochet a slip stitch to join. Pull tight. At this point, the third round is complete. Continue crocheting rounds 4 to 6. The stitches used in these rounds have all been demonstrated in detail earlier. The meaning of stitch instructions is similar to before. Just follow the stitch order in the chart, and repeat the corresponding number of times. At the end of each round, remember to join with a slip stitch to the first stitch. Make sure to tighten the slip stitch. Finish crocheting these rounds. After completing, leave a yarn tail. Here, I'll demonstrate with a small sample. First, crochet 1 chain to secure. Then leave a 50 cm yarn tail. Break the yarn. Pull the yarn through. Tighten it. That concludes the explanation of the first piece. Everyone, follow the same method, and crochet another piece. After finishing, there's no need to break the yarn. That concludes the explanation of section 1 of the bag bottom. Next, we will crochet section 2 of the bag bottom. Continue crocheting the piece without breaking the yarn from section 1. Start with the first round. Make 1 chain to begin. Turn your work. Pick up stitches, and work single crochets correspondingly into each stitch. Finish with the last stitch. Join with the first stitch using a slip stitch. Pull tight. The first round is complete. Now we need to compare the dimensions and trim the grid board. Here, you can cut a long yarn tail in another color first. Thread it into a sewing needle. Then secure the piece to the grid board. The method is up to you, as long as it's secure. Afterwards, trim the grid board along the edge of the piece. Be careful while cutting. Make sure not to cut the piece. You can slightly lift the edge of the piece to trim it. Start by cutting a rough outline. Then trim the edges afterward. Now, take a look at the edges. They can be slightly smaller than the piece. Once done, remove the securing thread. Next, pick up section 1 of the bag bottom with the broken yarn. Merge the two pieces. Align the shapes of the pieces here. Place the piece with the broken yarn at the back. The piece without the broken yarn faces you, with the right side facing out. You can then use stitch markers to find a few points along the edge for securing. If you don't have stitch markers, you can also use yarn tails or paper clips to secure it. Everyone, follow this method and secure multiple points. This makes sewing easier after securing is complete. Thread the yarn tail into a needle. Pick up 2 stitches from the edge of the pieces and sew them together. The grid board is wrapped inside. Follow this method to sew the entire round. Sew back to where you started. Continue sewing a few more stitches for extra security. Finally, weave the yarn tail on the wrong side, which is the side with only 6 rounds of piece. Start by making a few knots at an adjacent position. Then weave in the remaining strand into the piece. You can weave in a few more stitches. This secures the grid board in place. Continue crocheting for round 2. Start with 1 chain. Then turn your work. Pick up the stitches from the piece behind. Insert the hook and crochet the corresponding stitches. Be mindful not to pick up stitches from the front piece. Crochet until the last stitch. Join with the first stitch using a slip stitch. Pull tight. This completes round 2. For the remaining rounds, pick up stitches from the previous round and crochet accordingly. Refer to the chart for guidance. Crochet until all rounds are completed. After finishing, fasten off the yarn. Leave the yarn tails untreated for now. This concludes the explanation of section 2 of the bag bottom. Next, we will crochet the bag body. Here, you need to start by working back and forth, then continue crocheting in rounds. During this process, skip some positions and leave them unworked. This will form an opening. We will use one new stitch, a SC2 tog. There is also a new method introduced, K-skip. Please watch as I demonstrate. Start by working row 1. Place the ending position of section 2 of the bag bottom facing you. Pay attention that the right side of the last round should be facing you. Then locate the slip stitch. Begin with the first stitch of the previous round on the left side. Count 16 stitches to the left. Then insert the hook into the stitch to the left of those. Pick up the yarn. Make a slip knot. Place it onto the hook. Draw through. Adjust slightly. Then make one chain. Next, turn your work. Crochet 88 single crochets evenly in the next stitches. Weave the yarn tail as you crochet. If you encounter any previous yarn tails while crocheting, weave them in the same way. Continue crocheting downward. After completing, you will see K44 on the chart below. K stands for skip. The number after it indicates how many stitches to skip. Here, that means skip 44 stitches. You can check the stitch count at this point. At the same time, check if the skipped stitches are centered. If the position is off, you can adjust the starting position based on the situation. Now the first row is complete. Move on to the second row. There's no need to make a turning chain here. Simply turn your work. Then skip one stitch on the left. When there's no number after K, it means to skip one stitch by default. Start from the second stitch on the left side. Pick up stitches and work the corresponding number of single crochets one by one. After finishing, leave the last stitch unworked. The second row is now done. Next, the chart shows H3 to H9. Turn H6X. This means the crochet technique for these rows is the same. Begin each row by turning your work, then work 86 single crochets evenly. Repeat this process. Complete these rows. For the 10th row, there are no new stitches. Just refer to the chart and crochet as indicated. After completing it, move on to the 11th row. This row requires a color change. First, fasten off the previous yarn. Then pick up the corresponding color. At the last stitch of the previous row, pick up the stitch and insert the hook to join the yarn. Then turn your work. Pick up the stitches and work 6 single crochets evenly. Pay attention to weaving in the yarn tail as you crochet. Next, you'll need to work a SC2 tog. Start with an unclosed single crochet. Insert the hook. Yarn over and draw through. There will be 2 loops on your hook. That's the unclosed single crochet. Work another unclosed single crochet in the adjacent stitch. Now there will be 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and draw through in once. Complete the SC2 tog. Then work 6 single crochets evenly. Next, do another SC2 tog. Start with 2 unclosed single crochets. 1, 2. Finally, yarn over and draw through all loops. Complete the SC2 tog. For the rest, continue following the chart for crocheting. Finish the last stitch. Row 11 is now complete. For the next rows, from row 12 to row 15, just follow the chart while crocheting. There is no turning chain at the start of each row. After turning your work, crochet the corresponding stitches. Once done, start crocheting row 16. Begin with 2 chains. Then turn your work. Start from the second to last chain. Pick up the top loop of the chain. At this point, the wrong side of the chain should be facing you. Insert the hook into the top loop. Then work 1 SC2 in 1. For the following stitches, refer to the chart and crochet accordingly. Finish with the last stitch. Row 16 is now complete. Continue with row 17. First, make 2 chains. Turn your work. Pick up the stitch at the second to last position. That is the chain next to the single crochet. Pick up the top loop of the chain, and work a SC2 in 1. Then continue picking up stitches and crocheting accordingly. There are no new stitches or techniques used in this row. You can simply crochet straight through. For rows 18 to 22, start by crocheting the corresponding number of chains. Then go back and pick up the second to last chain to continue crocheting. Similarly, there are no new stitches or techniques used in these rows. Just refer to the chart directly. Finish crocheting these rows. After completing, start crocheting in rounds. Continue with the previous sequence number. Next is row 23. Start by picking up the previous yarn tail. Crochet 15 chains. Then slip stitch. Into the last stitch of the previous round. Pull tight. Then make 1 chain. Turn your work. Pick up the top loop of the chain. Work 15 single crochets evenly. Continue picking up stitches and crocheting accordingly. Finish with the last stitch. Everyone, check the stitch count. Then pick up the starting single crochet. Crochet a slip stitch to join. Pull tight. Round 23 is now completed. Move on to round 24. Start with 1 chain. Turn your work. Work single crochets evenly. Complete this round. Finish with the last stitch. Slip stitch into the first single crochet. Tighten the yarn. Round 24 is now complete. At this point, the body of the bag is crocheted. Here, you can break the yarn. With that, the body section of the bag is covered. Next, we will crochet the bag opening. There are 2 sections. First, crochet section 1 along one side of the bag body. Then, crochet section 2 along the remaining corresponding area. Please watch as I demonstrate. Here, I will continue using the small sample for demonstration. Face the ending position of the last round of the bag body toward yourself. Pay attention to having the neat side of the texture from the last round facing you. Then, starting from the left side of the slip stitch marks. At the first stitch position, count 19 stitches to the left. Join the yarn on the corresponding stitch. Make 1 turning chain. Turn the work. Continue crocheting the corresponding single crochets according to the chart. Pay attention to weaving in the yarn tail as you crochet. After completing the last stitch, the first row is done. Take a look now. Fold the bag body front and back in half. Check if this area is centered above the opening. If the position doesn't match, adjust the starting position accordingly. For rows 2 through 18, Just follow the chart to crochet the corresponding stitches. Everyone finish these rows. After completing, start crocheting row 19. Begin with a turning chain. Turn your work. Then skip one stitch and make one slip stitch. When there's no special instruction, don't tighten the slip stitch. Continue picking up stitches and work single crochets evenly. Keep crocheting until just before the slip stitch position on the chart. When you reach the corresponding position, crochet one slip stitch downward. There will be one stitch remaining. Leave it unworked. This completes row 19. For rows 20 through 23, simply follow the chart to crochet. After finishing row 23, fasten off the yarn. Once completed, continue to crochet the edging. On the right side of the piece, at the position of the right edge of row 1, pick up an adjacent stitch to join the yarn. Then make one chain. After that, pick up the edges of each row, selecting the spaces along the edge, and work single crochets correspondingly. There is no fixed requirement for the number of stitches here, as long as the edge looks flat and neat after completion. During this process, when you encounter previous single crochets and slip stitches, pick up the stitches and the braid of the slip stitch, and crochet in their respective positions. Similarly, there is no fixed requirement for the number of stitches, as long as the piece looks flat and beautiful. When you reach the position of the last row, pick up the stitches and the braid from the slip stitches separately, and work single crochets correspondingly. Then, on the other side, follow the previous method, and work single crochets evenly. Continue until you reach the edge of the first row. Pick up the left stitch and work one slip stitch. Then cut the yarn. Weave the yarn tail into the wrong side of the piece. You can weave in a few more stitches if needed. It's normal for the piece to curve inward slightly here. That concludes the explanation for section 1 of the bag opening. Next, we will crochet section 2 of the bag opening. Place section 1 of the bag opening facing you. Then move from section 1 toward the left. And find the corresponding stitch to join the yarn. Then crochet back and forth. Finally, crochet the edging along the edge. The method is the same as for section 1. Refer to the chart. And complete the crocheting of section 2. That concludes the explanation of the bag opening. With that, the main part has been fully explained. Next, we will make the decorations. Made from TPU. And a zipper. Strap. Claws. Collar. Wings. Spots. Facial features. Hat. Tail and little fish components. Make and attach them in sequence. Let's start by making the TPU part. Start by cutting the piece according to the paper pattern, then attach it to the bag bodice opening position. Next, crochet the edging separately. Finally, attach it to the edge of the opening. First, cut the piece. The kit comes with a paper pattern here. Cut it along the outer ring of the pattern. After completing the cutting, let's put together and check the size of the pattern. Place the pattern at the opening position. Take a look at the overall effect. If the paper pattern is smaller than the opening, you can allow for more space when cutting the piece. Afterward, pick up the piece and place the paper pattern on top of it. Use a carbon pencil or any pen that shows up on the piece and trace around the pattern in a circle. This step is done by yourself. Once you've finished drawing, cut along the marked lines. Everyone can complete this on their own. This is how the sample looks after cutting. Next, you need to place the piece over the opening and secure it in place. First, prepare a length of thin thread here. Leave the thread long enough. Then insert it into a fine needle. and set it aside for later use. Afterward, align the piece with the opening. Make sure the shapes match up. The straight edge goes on the bottom, and the curvy side goes on the top. Then, at the very center below, find a relatively centered position, which corresponds to the center of the piece. Use a thin needle and thread to secure it in place. You can slightly fold the piece in half, and then find the centered position. Tie a knot to secure it. And finally, at the very top, secure it using the same method. Then, find positions on both ends and secure them as well. You can secure multiple points if needed. The method for sewing will come after this step. Everyone can complete it on their own. After securing it completely, we'll start sewing below. First, take a 50-centimeter sewing thread and insert it into a thin needle. Then, turn the wrong side of the piece outward. We'll sew from the inside. Start from one of the corners below. Here, pick a spot on the inner side of the piece. Choose a position slightly inside from the edge of the piece. Roughly match and sew together. There's no specific requirement for the method, just make sure it's secure. Begin by leaving a bit of thread. Tie the two yarn tails into a knot to secure them. Then continue matching and sewing together. Pay attention to picking the inner side of the piece. Make sure not to pick the right side of the piece. Continue sewing using this method. If the thread runs out during the process, you can first pass the thread through the inside of the piece. Then take a new piece of yarn and tie a double knot with the previous tail end to secure it. After that, continue sewing. Here, sew all the way to the other end. If there's excess piece, you can trim it a bit before sewing. Continue sewing downward. After sewing, bring the thread to the starting tail. Then tie a double knot with both tails to secure it. Trim the remaining yarn tails and weave them inside the piece. Everyone can finish this part on their own. Then, turn the piece so the right side is facing outward. Next, remove the securing thread. Complete the rest of the steps by yourself. This way, the piece is now attached. Proceed to crochet the edging. Start with a foundation chain, then work a row of single crochets. Don't cut the yarn after finishing this row. You can compare the size with the edge of the hole here. It should be able to form a complete circle. If it's too short, at the starting chain, pick up the insertion point from the edge. Start crocheting again with the corresponding number of chains. After that, continue working single crochets into the chains. If it's too long, you can undo some of the stitches. Simply pull the yarn through. Unravel until you reach a suitable position. Keep the yarn tail for later use. Refer to the chart and complete it on your own. After completing, the next step is sewing together. First, enlarge the last loop on your hook. Pull the piece through from the inside. This will create a knot. It's to secure it so it doesn't unravel. Then take a new segment of yarn, in the same color. Insert the sewing needle. Turn the beginning chain of the edging to face it inward. Place it along the edge of the hole. Cover the connection point between the piece and TPU. You can start sewing from the corner position. Pick up the wrong side and sew together roughly in correspondence with the piece. There's no specific method required. Just make sure it's secure and looks nice. Leave a bit of yarn at the start. Pay attention to the direction while sewing. Tie the two yarn tails into a knot to secure them slightly. Continue sewing in correspondence. If the yarn runs out, tie another knot to join the new yarn. Sew until the beginning and ending can be connected together. Afterwards, deal with the piece's ending. If the dimension is not enough, untie the knot of the yarn tail, and continue crocheting single crochets. The extra chain part can be undone if needed. Unfasten the starting knot. Then follow the braid-like texture. Unravel one by one until there is one chain space left on the left side of the single crochet. When you reach the corresponding position, pull the final knot tight here. Then sew the beginning and ending together at the connection point. Pass the final yarn tail to the wrong side. And bring it to the side of the starting yarn tail. Then pass both tails into the piece. Tie a knot and weave in the ends inside the piece. This way, the edging is attached properly. That's all for the TPU part. Next, let's attach the zipper. Sew along the opening of the main part. Below, I'll share a method for sewing the zipper for your reference. You can also sew it in your preferred way. Please watch the demonstration. Now continue sewing the zipper. Here, I'll demonstrate using a small sample. Attach the zipper at the opening position. First, cut a piece of sewing thread a bit longer. Thread the needle. Fold the yarn end in half and tie a knot. Set it aside for later use. Before sewing, let's take a look at the structure of the zipper. When closed, the end with the zipper head is the top stop position. The other end is the bottom stop position. On both sides are the tapes. The tapes have the zipper chain attached to them. Position the opening facing you. Choose which end to place the zipper head, based on your usage preference. Position the bottom stop of the zipper on the side with the opening. Make sure the zipper head is facing up. Be mindful not to reverse its position. You can check the length of the zipper beforehand. The reserved lengths on both ends of the zipper can be roughly identical. Secure the bottom stop to the opening temporarily. When securing, ensure that visible stitches are minimized on the surface. Sew a few times to secure it well. The extra bottom stop position can also be fixed with a few stitches. After securing the bottom stop, pull the zipper open. Align the opening edge with the zipper chain roughly. Then start sewing one side of the zipper tape. Pick the stitch position of the main part's edging for sewing. Gently tighten the yarn slightly, so that no sewing traces show on the surface. Try to sew as densely as possible to make it more secure. Pay attention to adjusting the zipper and piece while sewing, ensuring the zipper teeth correspond with the piece edge. At the same time, keep the opening flat, and don't let the piece expand outward or pull inward. Everyone can continue sewing using this method. And sew a bit more at the ending for extra securing. Sew until you reach the other side's position, then close the zipper. And sew a few stitches to fix the two top stops to the piece. Pay attention to align the center of the zipper with the reserved position. Make sure the zipper head is facing outward, and don't sew it into the seam. After securing it well, You can slightly fix the excess part of the zipper to the piece if needed, or trim it off after leaving a little distance from the piece. You can decide based on your own preference. If the yarn tails are still long, you can go back and sew over them again to make it more secure. After completing, tie a knot and weave in the yarn tail. This way, one side of the zipper is secured. The sewing method for the other side is the same. Pay attention to zip up the zipper as you sew along. Adjust the position while sewing. Prevent sewing the two parts of the zipper crooked. At the same time, make sure the piece doesn't spread out or pucker inward. Keep everything neat and aligned. Everyone, go ahead and finish it. Now, take a look. This is the sample looks like after the zipper has been sewn on. That concludes the explanation of sewing a zipper.